Welcome to the third talk in St. Mary Magdalene's inaugural speaker series. We are delighted to have Professor Linda Woodward of the Art and Humanities Department at Lone Star College. Professor Woodward attended Ohio State University and Our Lady of the Lake University, where she received a bachelor's degree in liberal studies. She attended Lamar University, where she was graduated with a degree in art history with a focus on Northern and Italian Renaissance imagery. For several years, she led tour groups to Europe and Turkey for Our Lady of the Lake Houston campus. She has taught at Lamar University, Houston Baptist University, Our Lady of the Lake University, and has been a professor and department chair of art and humanities at Lone Star College, North Harris, and Montgomery campuses. Although retired 2 years ago, she still teaches online and remains active in her field. This evening, Linda will be speaking on Images of Christ. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Linda Woodward.
I want to thank you all for coming. I'm humbled that I'm able to speak at my favorite place, my parish. I want to tell you that I am an art historian. I am not a theologian, nor did I ever receive the education of a nun. But people ask me, what does an art historian do? I mean, this is what you do, so what do you do? Art historians are basically visual detectives. What we do is we try to unravel the background behind a work of art or architecture. Art historians are archaeologists. They are professors and teachers, which I do, and we do research. So for this particular lecture, I get to go back into my own research of early Christian images. Primarily, I'm a Northern and Italian Renaissance scholar, so this was relatively new to me. And actually, Richard helped me with a little bit of the research. We sat and tried to unravel things. If you ever think, a metaphor of this is just if you think about a piece of knitting, and if you've ever, those of you who knit have pulled it and it just keeps unraveling and unraveling, that's basically what we try and do. We can't guess. We have to have some sort of evidence. So it's not that I think the picture is pretty or I like the picture, but it leads you into what was the cultural context, what were people thinking, and what is the meaning of the work. So with that, I'll move forward. We're going to deal with the time of about 100 AD to about 1300 AD. And if you notice I'm saying, some of you may know that the old term was BC and AD, and then it became before the Common Era and the Common Era. And I don't use those terms because I can't figure out what the Common Era is common to. Okay, our dating is about the birth of Christ, correct?
Yes.
And so I think we need to hang on to that. Most recently, I've got to tell you, I taught early Christian art, and then about 5 years ago, it changed to late antiquity. And the ramifications of that, I'll let you draw those conclusions yourself. But let's jump right in, and I will ask you some questions, and feel free to answer. Don't be intimidated, because we are all a community of lifelong learners. And everyone here has a desire to learn something new, or you wouldn't be here. Well, let's look at this one. This is the first image that I have, and it's Christ as Sol Invictus. It is in the Vatican grottos, and it is a ceiling piece. But there are some things you may be curious about. First of all, it's a mosaic. And a mosaic is made of small square pieces of either stone, which are tesserae, or glass that's sandwiched with a piece in between. In this case, you can see the reflective gold and the green. So these are small pieces that were in here. Christ is here, and there are horses, and there are vines, and the title is Christ as Sol Invictus. That Sol Invictus means unconquered son. But what questions would you have if you, and the date of this is about mid-3rd century. So if you looked at this, what questions would you have? Is there anything that would make you, what is this or why is this? Any questions?
Why the horses?
Yeah. Exactly. Good, excellent question. The horses are there because people of cultures who are accepting and knowing Christ, bringing them into their lives, had to look to what was before. So Christ is traveling across the sky on a chariot, much like Apollo. Now, the first time I heard this, I was much younger. But I was very distressed because I thought, what do you mean, Apollo, pagan? You know, but this was the visual dialogue that they knew. Everyone knew. Apollo went across the sky. So this is Christ, and he has a halo, like Apollo would have the sun to the back of his head, except this particular type of halo is in the shape of a cross, and it's called a nimbus. A nimbus. So here is the face of Christ. We really did this look like Christ. No one knows what Christ looked like. You know, so they took the visual clues that they knew. Also, can anyone draw a connection here to the vines? Anybody? Right? And actually this is a reference to that and the wine, but it's also is taken from the earlier Roman god Bacchus, who turned water into wine. Okay? Any questions on this? You can ask any questions. If I don't know the answer, and I just may not, I'm happy to find the answer for you.
Linda, I need to ask you something. Who was it that turned wine?
Bacchus. Bacchus, the god of wine.
The god of
Dionysus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Common imagery of Christ. I think if I asked any of you what is the most common representation of Christ to you, would be, of course, our Lord on the cross, right? Interestingly enough, Christ on the cross does not really appear strongly in art until after 500 AD. So, what we're going to look at tonight, because we're talking about early Christian images, and these are more obscure. Some of you have been to the catacombs, I know. But these are more obscure. We're going to talk about Christ as the Good Shepherd. And we all can relate to what that means, correct?
Yes.
The baptism of Christ, something that maybe not very many people would see as that significant in what we know, okay? Christ as a Roman emperor. I told that to someone and they said, what? But Christ as a Roman emperor. When I take you through it, the leap is easy. It's easy because we're going to go back and look at the images of Christ as those people saw it, okay? And Christ as Pantocrator, which means Christ as creator of the world. Okay? So we're going to start in the beginning with Christ as the Good Shepherd. Okay, how did early Christianity visually perceive Christ? Here are the things that I just told you. Also a teacher and a philosopher. Here are the origins of the Good Shepherd imagery. It goes back as far as Greece. Okay, so we're looking back about 500 BC. Now, what were these figures? These figures are not Christ. What are they? This is a chorus. This one here, archaic Greek, about 500 BC. How do I know that? Well, I've researched and seen it, but also the stylistic portrayal of this person. This is not a portrait, and this is a funerary marker, a grave marker, and he has patterned hair, drilled eyes, so there's a shadow for the pupil, made of marble, and it's interesting that the calf makes a cross across his chest. This is a Roman copy of Hermes, the son of Zeus. He was the intercessor who would take souls into the afterlife. So in both images, the male statue is kind of a protector, kind of a remembrance and a protector. It's interesting that the Greek statues are nude, and there's chorus. But the chore, the female counterpart to this, is always dressed, and that's the culture from that period of time. Women were extremely modest. Here are the biblical references, and I think most of you know them. I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So it seems very normal that the pictures that I show you would be interpreted culturally into early Christianity. Christ as the Good Shepherd from the Roman Empire. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how Romans portrayed themselves in art. Romans portrayed themselves very naturalistically. They are about this life and the life of a good citizen. So it's quite normal to see that this particular image here which is a sculpture in the round. Okay, it's from the Catacomb of Domitilla, which is the Italian pronunciation, from about 300 AD. This is a sculpture in the round, which is rather rare because, does anyone know why that might have been rare, a sculpture in the round from that time? Graven images. Okay, so this is a rather rare statue. There are some scholars that think that this could have been removed from the front of a sarcophagus, but if it's a sculpture in the round and the base is round, it seems to me that it was meant to be such. Now, interesting too is this one, and these images are repeated time and time again in catacombs. This isn't the only one. You'll see them many, many times repeated with exactly the same liquid holding vessel here, or the pouch for the water or the wine here. Now, one of the things about the Romans that started from the Greeks is that in the beginning, if you know anything about Egyptians, their stance was like this in their sculpture. It was very rigid. But as the Greeks became more and more enamored with naturalism, they did something that was called a contrapposto, which means that if you had a shift in your hip and your arm. See, isn't that kind of a natural pose rather than like this? And you'll see this coming in the images of Christ. Now, the reference to these two little animals here, and there was a landscape, because I've seen some very much like that, is a reference to the Garden of Paradise. Okay? Any questions on those two from about 300? Do you find them appealing, the naturalism? Our culture likes naturalism. It likes that appeal. Now, the catacombs of Domitilla from 300 AD, and we start to get into really some scenes from the life of Christ. Okay, on this side is Christ as the Good Shepherd, and over here is more Christ enthroned. Can you see where he's on a throne here? He's on a very rich-looking robe. Okay? And so, is this a question for anybody?
That's the one you said that was that you talked about earlier?
I don't know if I was talking about Basio. Basio. Okay, I saw this for the first time and I thought, what the heck, because it's not the artist. Basio was, I believe, a 15th century Italian archaeologist. And when he was in the catacombs, he decided he was going to sign his name to show that he's the one who found that. And actually, it's amazing they have left that there. But he's marked more than one. Now, how were these made? Okay, first of all, the catacombs were not a pleasant place to be. We would not be having a lecture in the catacombs, okay? Because the Romans did not believe in preserving the body. The whole concept of preserving the body was considered foreign to Romans. They didn't. You were wrapped in a sheet and tucked away. So, do you think the catacombs had an unusual smell? And so if you can say anything about the frescoes, and I'll explain that to you here, it's that they're very gestural. Were there special, highly skilled, trained people to paint in the catacombs? No. If you thought that you could do it, have at it, get your paint, and go for it. And the areas were plastered. They had a light plaster on them and then painted. But the type of painting that we see a lot in the catacombs, this is a little more ornate, is gestural. They're quickly doing this sort of thing. So you see an active line. You see something very quick. So this is the case of the Good Shepherd here and Bosio's fresco here with Christ as the ruler. We're going to talk more about Christ as a ruler a little bit later. Now, this is the catacombs of Domitilla again, the Good Shepherd. And this is the word of the day. You can ask Alan, he'll tell you. The word of the day for this type of place where a body was slid in here was an arcosolium. Arcosolium. Meaning, I don't know about my Latin, Father, the ark of the sun. Okay, so it's an archway where the body is put in. Arcosolium. And again, if you look here, there may be a picture of the deceased in there. Here's the Good Shepherd, again here. But these were dark, damp nasty places, really. What they found in studying the bones, and most of the catacombs are stripped clean, but there are some that still have burials, okay? What they found is that the bones that were kept towards the center of a room, which is called a cubiculum, in the center of the room tend to fare better than those people who were in the slots that are called loculi, because they were closer to the moisture, okay? And these are down like 12, 17, even deeper.
12 or 17 feet or meters?
Feet, I don't speak meters. I was educated in America. I did spend some time in Europe, but we didn't speak meters there either. This is the catacombs of Dorothea. Again, now, if ever there was a rapid sketch, look at this, the energy here, you know? This is Noah, and I have to look at my notes to see who the other one is because I always forget. Noah and Moses. This is Noah, this is Moses. Okay? They're I think it's rather clever that they're done across an arch, but there's something even more clever going on here. Normally when you see figures in the catacomb, you see like here's a figure, and they're bound by a space. Okay? In this case, how is this different? There's no space. Absolutely. These show absolutely overlapping and showing a shallow depth. Okay, a shallow depth. There's also a scale of hierarchy. What the scale of hierarchy means is the important person is in the center and usually higher. That's how you can identify who's the most important. The other thing is this compressed space, another word of the day, is called horror vacui, which is fear of open space. So, and I think, can you all see that this is clearly gestural? Someone got in there and worked away, and then, any questions on this? Okay, if you have one, don't be shy.
What's the theory of, as far as, who are those? I mean, is that 12 and Jesus, could that be Jesus and the, I mean, who is that? I mean.
Yes, 12, and here's Christ.
Yeah, so that's the apostles and Christ.
It's actually the Last Supper. Good question.
Oh, yeah. Why didn't I?
Yes,
read the title?
Bernadette.
They call it fear of what space?
I would have read the title.
Fear of, it's horror vacui is fear of, it's compressed space and it's like, you're gasping for air. So if it's very close and there's no air, it's horror vacui, fear of open space. Does that help you?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, why would they say that? I guess
It's an artistic term.
Oh, artistic. Okay.
Yeah, it's not just for tombs, that's a real good question,
Okay.
Bernadette.
Okay.
Any painting that you see where there's 1 million people in there and they're compressed, yes, it would be a case of horror vacui.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent question, thank you, Bernadette. Okay, ready? Hang on to your seats. This particular image of Christ as the Good Shepherd is so common in the catacombs, it's seen. I mean, I had about 14 to choose from. So what does this tell you? It tells you that the person who painted this had gone to other catacombs, you see, and the message spreads. So this is Christ as the Good Shepherd, and then people will say, what are the birds? Are they the Holy Spirit? No. These are birds and the lambs and the landscape relate to paradise. Okay, and then they always fill in with these borders. They enclose it in the red circle. I don't think that there's any particular meaning to the red circle.
So their depiction there is that Christ is taking the soul to paradise.
Yes, yes, but it also could mean, who knows what else it could mean?
The animals in paradise.
Well, yes. What else?
I always worry about my dog.
We all do. Anything else?
When Noah went into the ark, when did some animal?
Another meaning of this is a metaphor for Christ is
Merciful?
the metaphor. Christ, the lamb is a metaphor for Christ. So there's multiple meanings in there. And remember that these people were not literate. So when you came in, you got the message. I mean, this goes all the way up to the Gothic cathedrals. That's what the purpose of the stained glass windows were for. Because people couldn't read the Bible, but they could see the picture. How many of you would recognize this as Christ the Good Shepherd?
The lamb on the shoulder.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a very simple thing. Yes, Bernadette.
It looks like whoever did this was not a big hurry, because it looked very clear.
I think that, yes, there's shading put in, but it's pretty easy to do. If you've ever done watercolors, you just draw the outline, and they could also bring in something to trace.
And it's in a cell,
It's in
like the nucleus. It looks like a cell. A
yeah, I'm not
plant-
sure I'm not sure that the red or the circle has anything except, you know, a very far-ranging conjecture would be like, you know, for eternity, the circle.
It looks like a nucleus to me, the nucleus of a cell.
I don't know if they would have known that, though.
No.
Now, this is kind of interesting. This is the catacombs of Priscilla, or Priscilla. And the catacombs were in use probably from the 2nd century to the 5th. By the 5th, they were just about done. But you had your choice, depending on how much money you have, to be in, a loculum, which this is a slot, so your body would be put in there, and it would be plastered over. And if you had enough money, you would have a marble marker that would fit across there, okay? But embalming, not usually. Over here is a cubiculum, which means bedroom. They had urns with ashes, okay? And they could be pagan and Christian were buried in the catacombs. It's a myth when they say that, you know, the catacombs ran down there to hide, to worship, you know, because Diocletian was ready to get them. For the most part, there were some ceremonies held down here, and certainly funerary, but not to the point where a congregation would be coming down to the catacombs every Sunday. These were just not the nicest places, but they were mixed, Christian and pagan. They were mixed. It wasn't... Now, the question someone asked me once was, why would they be buried underground? The Romans were very concerned with plagues, different types of diseases, so they did not want people buried in the city, and they did not want people to contaminate. So if they put them underground, they kind of turned an eye to it. And an individual would own the land, and then they would dig the catacombs. So another person said, how did they dig the catacombs? Because they didn't have blasting caps. And the reason is because the stone down there was tufa, a very soft volcanic stone that could be easily carved. Even with a spoon you can carve away at tufa. So it wasn't that it was a major task. And it leaves this kind of roughness here. They would replaster and they would decorate, but there wasn't like a band of artists who came and did a particular catacomb per se. It was like if you were the family of the deceased and you wanted to find somebody or do an image yourself, you were welcome to do it. So it comes to the period of urns with cremation. But the Christian church did not fall into that. They did not believe in cremation. And does anyone know the reason why?
Resurrection.
Yeah, the resurrection of the body.
Yeah.
I remember for some reason, Father, when I was a child, the families weren't allowed to cremate. Because I was a child 100 years ago. But, you know, cremation, we didn't talk about it. But they didn't. And in fact, I think it's during the time of Hadrian that actually cremation falls into disuse and people are being buried. Any questions on the catacombs? So now we can levitate off the ground, okay? This is a very, very rare sarcophagus. And the reason being is because it was before Christianity had the Edict of Milan in 1313, which stopped the persecution of Christians. This is 270 AD, and it is a Roman sarcophagus. The detail on this is astounding because they take and quarry a huge block of marble. And now these are very skilled artists, and this was a very expensive way to put a body into a catacomb. Okay? Here, this, by the way, was found under Santa Maria Antiqua, the Roman sarcophagus. Okay? They took the marble and started to chisel, and they used both pagan, because that's what they knew. Anybody who's a convert in here, you came from somewhere else, right? They knew the imagery, and they would be able to identify with it. So, in this case, in the sarcophagus, and I wouldn't like to lift this at all, but this is in prime shape. I mean, it has nothing wrong with it. I've never seen a sarcophagus that was this beautiful, except for Junius Bassus. But anyway, we'll start over here. I may have a slide. Yeah. Over here, we have Jonah going over the boat, and two men here. They have a nice little canopy here, and Jonah is lowered over. Now, in the case of when you see Jonah and the whale in these types of sarcophagi, you will see that it's not a whale. It's a sea monster. So I'm not sure, I'm not a scholar enough to know about the translations, but somehow English got into the whale. And so here we have the tail. Okay, let me go to the other side and see if I don't think I can have a better picture of that. Let me see. Nope. Over from here, here's the sea monster. So we have that. There's a lot going on. This is a simultaneous narrative, it's called. So there's lots going on, and everybody can draw whatever they want from it. But here is where Jonah goes over. Now here is a very classical image. This is Jonah for this sarcophagus. But in pagan times, anytime you see a reclining male nude with his arm like this, he is called Endymion. Endymion was a very handsome youth. And a goddess named Selene was in love with him, and she prayed to the gods that she could always have her eyes on him. Well, in fact, they made him go to sleep for eternity, so Selene could just look at him. So, be careful what you pray for. Then, we have some sheep that are over this shady canopy. And I have no idea what the sheep mean. I've looked high and low. But a question that you may have as we move over this is what happened to these people's faces?
Yeah.
This sarcophagus would not have had the faces carved until it was sold. Okay? So they don't, it's portraiture in this point for the Romans. Okay? So they want it's a husband and wife, a couple. She is a praying figure, and she's called, does anyone know what the term is? An orant, O-R-A-N-T, an orant. And an orant has, we do this sometimes in church, don't we? But the elbows are to the side. And it's usually a female praying figure, usually female. Now, we have the man who is a scholar or portrayed as a philosopher. And as we move along, can someone identify this figure? Christ is the Good Shepherd. Looks very much like what I showed you before, right?
Right.
So what they're doing is they're seeing other works of art and copying those to fit the context. There's not all that much that's original here. Now, when we get over here, can someone classify what's going on here?
Jesus is bringing the little children.
St. John the Baptist.
Yes. Yes, you get the Intelligentsia Award today. It is John the Baptist. And do you see here, who is this?
This Holy
Holy Spirit. And who is this?
Christ.
And so what question do you have about this? Look at our context when we talk about
Why
it.
is there seem to be such an age difference?
Anybody questioning the age difference?
Yeah.
What does baptism do for us?
Newborn.
It's new
Who said
life.
newborn?
Yeah.
Who said newborn?
New life.
Well, you get the Intelligentsia Award now. Sorry. It means it is the start of a new life. You are innocent as
A child.
exactly. And you would not think that that would fit so readily, but it does, and we'll see lots of images of Jesus as a youth. Then over here, we have two men with fishing nets. Now, I'm not sure who they are. It's not been documented. But what do you think this is about here? Can someone say? Two men with a fishing net.
Fishers
Fishers
of men.
of men.
Jackie, good.
Fishers of men.
Absolutely. So do we love this?
Yeah.
How much do we know about it?
A lot more than
A lot more.
I always tell my students, when you come into my class, you will walk out a different person. You will walk out a different person. So, any of you could come up here and talk about this. And the rarity of it is that it is prior to the legality of Christianity. Think about that. I want one of these. Alan's not buying into it.
Well, apparently nobody bought that one, so still,
Absolutely.
You can have your face carved in.
Yeah, Alan and I can have our faces carved.
I bet you get a good deal on it now. It's gotta be.
Now, any time that we're looking at early Christian war, we have to think about what's going on in the world around, okay? And this is the head of Constantine. One of the most significant things about this is, do you remember I told you that the Romans were all about naturalism, okay, the contrapposto? Okay, when you look at this figure, first of all, the head is huge. It is monstrous. And there's also a finger pointing up and a foot nearby. But for this practical purpose, Constantine is very much portrayed as otherworldly. I mean, can you see that he's looking somewhere else? Yeah. Now, here's the good and the bad about Constantine. Constantine, in 313, he was the Caesar of the West. He challenged the Caesar of the East, who was Maxentius, and he won in the battle and basically got control of both areas. But they threw Maxentius in the Tiber. Okay, so that's the end of Maxentius.
Doing well, I'm sorry.
They threw him in the Tiber.
Okay.
He went into the, so he was no more. But the good and the bad of Constantine is that yes, Constantine stopped the persecution of Christians. Okay, which is a very good thing. But Constantine, in reading the history books, was accused of not such good things. Supposedly, I think that he was involved with the murder of his son Crispus. So he was not what you would say a model pious Christian. And in fact, he was not baptized until his deathbed.
Yeah. He did that intentionally too. He wanted.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, his mother was in and out. That's a whole other lecture on Helena.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that I was shocked, and every time that I do a presentation or do research, I learn something. Okay. Constantine was supposedly baptized by an Arian. And I never knew that before. We'll talk a little bit about the Arian heresy in a little bit. Okay. And this is just an aside. In 380, the Emperor Theodosius I made the Nicene Christianity the empire's legal religion. It was the only legal religion. Okay? Now, who can tell me about this? This is Christ as
Good shepherd.
Good Shepherd. But there's even more to it.
It's got a cross.
Yes, yes. This is Christ as a Good Shepherd from the Mausoleum of Galla Placida in Ravenna. Ravenna is in Italy, and it was a prominent port. There are two factions of Christianity there. There are the Arians, and there are the Naonians, from Bishop Naon, who was a more of an Orthodox type Christian who believed in the Trinity. Now, in this case, not only is Christ the Good Shepherd, but it leads into another topic that we'll be covering, and that is that he has the garb of a Roman emperor, purple and gold. He has a halo behind him, not a nimbus, but the cross, but it is a halo, and then he has the cross as his staff. Now, let me ask you something. Every time that you see a picture, I don't care, a painting, wherever you are, if you're at church, take and stop and look and say, can I visually get into this picture? Can I visually get in? I want you to look at this. What does this function as? See these rocks here? This
Edge of a ledge of.
it's the edge of a ledge, so I'm not easily moving into this. Okay, this is a sacred space. And what does the landscape and the trees refer to?
Paradise.
Paradise. Absolutely. Are you with me? Nobody's sleeping yet. Okay. Let me see if I have anything else. Go ahead.
What's on his foot or down at the level?
Here?
Yes, is that a mask or a helmet?
No. That's his shoe.
Is it a shoe?
He's wearing sandals. Which also is kind of, it's a good thing you brought that up, Jackie, because it's also the fact that so many times when you look at paintings, you'll see if people are on sacred ground, they're barefoot. Even Christ. But in this case, he has sandals on. So, good question, Jackie.
Oh, Jackie,
I would not
Linda.
before we go on, you said that Representative Legs.
Yeah, it's on a helmet.
Before you were saying that we couldn't work ourselves into that picture.
This is kind of a barrier here.
So that means you couldn't go into that picture.
No, it's meant to be observed with reverence, but this is also high up.
Yeah.
This is also rather high up.
Okay.
I like the ceiling.
Okay?
Yeah, the ceiling is.
Also, this does show some space by overlap and by perspective, leaning back, so that going back to Christ as the center. So there is some space. It's shallow. Yes, Bernadette?
It looks like they moved away from Christ, the shepherd with the lamb on the shoulder. This time it's the sheep's all over.
They're all around him.
All around him.
Yeah, that's an interesting note. That's a very interesting note.
And also, all the sheep are looking at Christ.
How?
Yeah.
Okay, then you get the intelligentsia. We're passing this around. The message is, the shape of this is a lunette. Okay, a lunette means a half moon. Good. Anything else?
Can I say something?
Of course.
Yeah, it just the question here that Christ is not carrying the sheep with him, but this is the teaching stuff of paradise. There is
He's already there. He's already brought them there. So he's already carried them up. Now he's there. Yeah.
That's really a good point.
Father, you get the intelligence.
Oh, you get the intelligentsia right now. And feel free to chime in.
He has more followers.
That's great.
The message is peace and protection because of the cross. Now, an aside, who was Galla Placida? Okay, and this is the mausoleum. Galla Placida was buried there and was embalmed. She was embalmed, which is rare, remember, and entombed sitting upright, which is quite rare. In 1577, much later, she and the contents of her tomb were burned, but we don't know why. I've looked high and low, and I've not been able to find why. So she ended up being cremated for all possible purposes.
So Linda, do you know if it was intentional or non-intentional? It was burned?
You know, I have my feelings, but I wouldn't take it to court. Okay, so we've had a little preview of Christ as a Roman emperor here, but we're going to go on and talk about the baptism of Christ, the early baptism of Christ. And you try not to put too much emotion, you try and read things as they were for that time, but the early images of the baptism of Christ are sincerely some of the most touching images. And the only question I have, Father, would Christ have really needed to have been baptized and be born as a youth again, innocent? Because he was innocent to begin with. Getting a... Yes.
You want an answer to that? He needed to, because what he was coming to earth to do is to redeem man. So he needed to go down
Mhm.
the road of being baptized. That's his death, so that he will come out victorious, coming to redeem man. He has to go through the process. Man, we have to be
Same as what we would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
He's the
good point.
example.
we have to go through that path for us to get our salvation. If not, what was destroyed from our first parent, the flesh, Adam and Eve. Remember that? So the flesh needs to be redeemed. That's why it came, the incarnation.
Mhm.
He didn't need to come as a baby in the womb of Mary. It would have come through other means.
Right,
But he decided to come as a man
and go through our experiences.
through experience.
Excellent. Thank you. You get the-
You're gonna get an A.
I know. This is from the Catacombs of Callistos, and sometimes you see them as Calixtos. But here, when we were talking about gestural drawings, you can see this is very rapid with the drape, and it is still a Roman natural drape. It hangs very much like a natural drape. And it's interesting how Christ is nude, and he's kind of leaning forward like, okay, I'm ready. You know, I think this is a very dear picture, and none of the pictures that I have seen of this have been of any better quality than this. And then here is a scene from the Catacombs of Callistos, and here Richard will tell you who this is,
Saint Cecilia.
who was,
She was an early martyr.
right? And her hands were like,
Oh, right. She, in
we
defending,
discussed this.
in defending the Holy Trinity, she has 3 fingers out for the 3 persons of the Trinity, and 1 finger out to say one God and 3 persons. So in her, they attempted to behead her, and they started sawing her head, and you can notice that in there. But this is how she died.
This is a replica of a much later, it wasn't done during the Cataclysms, it was much later, but it's here so people can see. Okay, any questions on this so far?
Picture to the side there on that second one.
Christ. And shown with rather large eyes. When you see the large eyes, it means otherworldly. There are little nuances that you can pick up. And up until, I would say about the year 500, you're going to see the Roman naturalism, which means when I say that the drape hangs naturally, that the pose is very natural. But then after 500, and it starts with Constantine in 312 with his large eyes and very much otherworldly, we're going to see a departure from that into Byzantine art, which will emphasize, rather than this life and the naturalism, the next life. And that's the visual message that will be conveyed.
Linda, I got a question. I know a lot of this art is pretty much in Europe. Is there any art in Jerusalem, Israel, in the Middle East that?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. In that's a whole other lecture, but one of the oldest sites is Dura Europa, which is in Syria. Yeah. If you come to the talk about Mary, there'll be one of the first images of Mary that's suspected from Dura Europa. I'm pretty much stuck to
Yes.
Rome. Now, this is my favorite baptism image. I mean, Christ, now, John the Baptist's hand is here. Okay, but the Holy Spirit is actually baptizing him, which I think is kind of unique. I haven't seen very many images like that. And again, it's done in a frame, a fresco wall. There is some shadows and shading here. This was all destroyed, and they chose not to replace it. And I think that's a good idea, because I know there are sites in the world that you go to, Crete is one, where they're so overly restored, you have no idea what it looked like to begin with. I mean, it's been restored so many times. So we've kept this rather simple. Okay, and this is the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter from the 3rd century. And here we have, can someone tell me what this is, the word of the day? Oh, the net note and arco solium. Arco, see, the body would be right in here. And you might be lucky enough to be put up here in a loculum. And here too. Okay? But you can get an idea of the decor that was in. But these are just rapid paintings. They're not, you know, they're no Michelangelo or Leonardo type work. And in fact, this may have been the deceased person, I read. Okay? Now, we get a little bit into church history here. Let me get to my notes. Oh, let me go back. I have one other thing to say on this. In the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter, one thing that's very odd that they can't figure out is that in this catacomb, there are several mass graves. So not in loculi, or not in an arcosolium. So there are mass graves. And the bodies, remember the Romans were not real big on preserving the bodies or anything, but these bodies were wrapped in fabric and plaster, and some of them were covered with like a sap. Okay? So mass grave, bodies wrapped in fabric. And by the way, fabric is a very expensive commodity. You have to make fabric. You have to spin linen. You have to weave linen. Then, you know, you have to process it. So it's not something that you just run to Walmart and buy. It's something that's expensive. Why do you think that there were several mass graves that were excavated from the 3rd century? Mass graves. So pits.
Maybe there was a plague.
Who said it? You're going to get that award back, aren't you? Yes, they think it was possibly for an epidemic. So why would they wrap the bodies?
So the germs don't get out. Same thing with
Good deal,
plaster.
Jackie. Yes,
Hold it in.
absolutely. Absolutely. I may have to pay some of you to come to my class. Revitalize my students. Now, the next slide, I'll keep this as shallow as I dare. This is Ravenna. And we're going to talk about this is about 400, maybe a little bit before. We're going to talk about the architecture super briefly. And that is that during this time in Ravenna, it's not, when you look at the architecture, you don't see, like those of you who have seen the Gothic cathedrals with all the sculpture outside and everything. It's not about that. It's about the interior self. So the interior of these buildings are very ornate. They just have you just walk by that, you wouldn't think it was much of anything, would you? But when you go inside, it's startling. And what we see is a shift of 2 different factions of Christianity. One is Arian, the Arian heresy. Has anybody ever heard of it before? Okay. And the other is the Neonian, which is a new word for Richard and I, from Bishop Neon. So, the Arians were a faction that came from Germanic tribes from the north who believed that Jesus was not equal to the Father. Don't turn me into Father Felix. I'm just reporting it. that Jesus was not equal to the Father. That the Father created Jesus, and he was a sort of demigod. It is a non-Trinitarian faction, okay? It is considered heretical. It was, let me see when that was, but it was, a council came and it was declared heretical, okay? The Arian came from the teachings of Arius, who was from 256 to 336 in Alexandria, Egypt, okay? So we've got this faction in Ravenna. Then we have the more orthodox or staid Christian that said the Trinity exists, they are one in being, okay? Now, for all practical purposes, the art is very similar. You couldn't, at least I couldn't, go and say, oh yes, that's an Arian and that's a Neonian. They're very similar. And the baptism of Christ is equally as charming. Tony, I know we're getting close, I'm watching it. Here's the baptism of Christ from the Arian baptistry. It's still around today. And I'll show you, these are the apostles around, and I'll get to the center. Here it is. Most charming. Christ being baptized. He's kind of got that adolescent kind of pudginess to him. And John the Baptist. And for those of you who are counting, are we invited into this picture?
No.
No, not really. The water kind of puddles here. John the Baptist is always shown on this kind of, we used to call them in graduate school cheesy rocks. It's like cheddar cheese that's been hacked up. So we call, and John the Baptist is of course in his animal skin. Okay, he has a staff, and here is now the Holy Spirit is baptizing Christ. So, give me a question, somebody, about this picture. Exactly. Exactly. This is the personification, meaning acting as a person, of the River Jordan. He is a river god from pagan Rome. Now here is the $65,000 question, because I had to dig hard to find this. When you look at the river god here, what's going on? What are these?
Horns.
We're not going to get into Karen, Father, I promise you. No, they're not horns, although out of our culture we would think they were horns, right?
Yeah.
They are crab claws. From the river. He is a river god. And if you notice, ladies, I know you've noticed, he has quite a physique for being his age.
Yeah.
Doesn't he? The water is like a sheet that's held up, like a transparent sheet. You can see his legs through, and it's kind of interesting that he's probably like in 3 or 4 feet of water, but it kind of comes down here. And then you see this kind of craggy drapery here to kind of complement the cheesy rocks over here. So this is the Arian heresy baptism of Christ, okay? Here is the Neonian from Ravenna, okay? Different building. How is this different? Well, I'm going to give you a chance to look because I have some comparisons. But if you look, don't they look more Roman in the way the body's portrayed? And notice it's got kind of imperial drapery around it. Very rich, very rich. And some shading. And the Holy Spirit is much like we show the Holy Spirit now. Right? And here's a little close-up. Now, someone's going to ask me about this river god, right?
He's really little.
Yeah, he's been relegated to the side. He's got a little leaf that he may be shoveling some water over. But he now is definitely subordinate to the picture. Are we all in agreement on that?
Yeah.
How many people would have
And
guessed that?
Christ look older.
Christ does look older, and guess what else? Yeah, late 5th century, you'll start to see a few indications. Someone said, when did Christ get a beard? I said, well, we don't really know for sure. But for the most part, he's beardless, and about 6th century, 500, it starts in the east, and it's much later in the west. But in this case, in Ravenna, there's a lot of an eastern influence. And he's looking to the side. He looks like he knows what's going on. He seems more understanding. Apostles. Good, very good. Yes.
When it says your as a word, is that also something that came after?
I'm not sure because it would have. I don't know if they painted that over, but this is the Jordan River god. So that's very appropriate and good to point out. Very good. There's your difference. Very little difference in time. Circa the earlier part, maybe of the 5th century, the Neonian, later 5th century. But this for sure is showing more of Imperial Rome in the outside. Are we good with that? How many people feel like you've really know a lot more than when you walked in? Good, good. That makes, because this isn't about me, this is about you. Okay, let's see. Oh, I love this one. This is walrus ivory, and so walrus ivory was extremely precious. Elephant tusk ivory was extremely precious, and they had to have special artists carve. This is a small container lid, a casket. It's called like a box, not like something you put a body in. It's about 3 inches by 2 inches. But we see here a little bit different. Look at John the Baptist, and I make my students get up and do this, but I won't make you. Try and get into the pose of John the Baptist. It's hard. He's kind of like, you know, he's kind of leaning over. It seems almost impossible. He has a halo. Christ has a halo, but I love the water kind of rising up here. What is the demeanor of Christ here?
Childlike.
Childlike, yes.
Yeah, young. very
Young,
He
but what
looks
else?
frightened, a little frightened.
A little frightened and also
Little
removed. He's like,
Yeah.
he knows what's going on, but he's a little frightened and he's removed. You see his eyes, he's not really looking at John the Baptist, or, you know what I mean? He's kind of in awe of the entire event. I've never seen such a small, 3x2. And this is Anglo-Saxon, so it's from the north, okay? I think that's very charming though, don't you? If you go to a museum and you see these, if you ever go to London and you get to the British Museum, I promise you'll levitate over all the goodness of Christianity that is in the British Museum. Beautiful things. Okay, now here we can talk. This is the altarpiece in St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice. They think it was made between 9 and 1200. This is the same scene we've seen. You say, we've seen it again, we've seen it again. Here's the same scene. Look at the river god now. He's like half dead. The symbol of St. Mark's.
Yeah.
John the Baptist baptizing Christ. This is a sheet of gold. And what's happened is they've put all around these little areas here, they've put gold wire and they've enameled in a kiln. So they've melted. I've done this before, but not with gold. And they've melted this design. And then the rest is sheer gold. So it's a very difficult procedure. And the altarpiece is also encrusted with jewels. The most amazing thing is when you go into these churches, these are out. No one seems to make off with them. But the element of trust and the goodness and humanity is there. I think this is kind of an unusual depiction of the baptism of Christ. And then there's this one that Richard helped me unfigure. Right, Richard? This is 13th century, so this is more of a Byzantine-looking event, okay? Now, the question is, the axe to the side, people question. We don't have a deacon here, because I was going to call on them. The fish, which are symbols of fishers of men, right? The miracle of the loaves and fishes, right? And the baptism of Christ. I forgot to tell you that there was an axe in the other one too. I don't see it there now. Is it by the tree? Yeah, it's up there, right up here. It's hidden behind the tree. Alan found that one. Okay, the axe. I searched for this, and I'm not a biblical scholar. So it comes from a quote in the Bible. And now the axe is laid to the root of the tree, which brings not forth good fruit. Matthew 3, verse 10. And it's John in his sermon of repentance. Christ has a nimbus. But you see how this looks very different? I think this Byzantine art, we're getting into Byzantine now, very serious. Very serious. And Christ is very serious. He has a nimbus halo. With John the Baptist is reaching over, kind of like...
Not wanting to touch him.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. And we have John the Baptist and the earth here, Christ as the intermediary, and then we have the angels from heaven. But it's a different feeling, isn't it?
He looks more like the suffering Christ.
Yeah, it does.
Good point. Very good point.
Yeah.
Yes, he does.
Tilt of the
Or
head or something.
beaten down.
Well, the shoulders are.
Already thinking about his mission.
Yeah.
Linda, can you go back just a minute?
Sure.
Down at the bottom right, it looks like a
Are
little
those
guy with
feet
an
or
orange
what is it?
Oh, Richard and I, this is where we looked high and low for this, and I thought, well, maybe it's somebody that John the Baptist had baptized, and Richard said, no, I don't think so, let's dig a little further. So, what we decided, did you agree with me on this? Yeah, we see that it's possibly a soldier from the Pharaoh's army when Moses led his people out of Egypt. Yeah, it would be a symbolic figure there. Okay. This is an Italian, and the Italian portrayal of the baptism is totally different. First of all, it's very lavish, and if you look, God up in heaven looks surprisingly like Christ. Okay? One in being with the Father. John the Baptist, we still have those rocks. Couldn't we get in this picture? No. This is pretty dangerous here. And the angels are wearing Florentine silks.
Yeah.
That's how you know that it's an Italian, is the Florentine silks. And when this tree is in here, there are people that reference this as the tree of knowledge. Is it for sure? I have no idea.
Oh, no longer a child.
No, he's no longer a child, no. He's an adult in this.
And there's
Who
three,
said that? Because they get the intelligentsia. Again, Jackie.
and there's only 3 trees there too, so that's kind of interesting as far as, could that be a symbolism of the Trinity?
I don't know, because this is earth. This is the earth side. This is the heaven side. And Christ is the mediator. Everybody's. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am I still on solid ground here, Father? Okay. He's not taking notes. Father Felix won't know.
Yes, yeah, 2 angels.
So there they are comparing, and there they are. I'm getting close to the end here. I can go on, but Tony, I'm wrapping it up. This is my favorite baptism of Christ, and this is from Notre Dame. Those of you who have been in the apse of Notre Dame, it made it after the fire. This is, yes, it did survive. The one thing though, every time I went there and saw it, I was dying to dust it. It's covered in dust. And there's all scenes from the life of Christ along the apse. And I'm going to leave you with this. These images are eventful. Why are they eventful? Early 14th century. Because during the other times, I told you that they were copying other art. If I do a drawing and you copy what I do, and then you copy what she did, it's getting really removed from everything. Okay? At the start of the 14th century, in Paris, there's strong evidence that they used live models. So all the awkwardness of John the Baptist, when I said he's like in these awkward poses, I tried this at home. You can try it at home tonight. That John the Baptist really can. He puts his foot here, see it's out, and he puts this arm up, and he balances himself. He really can pour the water on Jesus. It's a perfectly, and you would have to have a live model to be able to do that.
But he's also holding on to his shoulder.
Yes. Yeah. Holding him steady.
The balance.
Yeah. Now, what is this angel doing right here?
He's ready to dress.
No, look at the face.
Smile.
Yes, he's smiling. The theory, and remember that Paris had the first university, is that humankind is positive, that there is hope for a better future through redemption. In the medieval time, the time before, given the choice of good and evil, humankind is going to probably choose evil, and it's going to be harder for them to get into heaven. But there is, in the Gothic period, a resurgence of joy, a resurgence of using live models. This is the Virgin of Paris, and she made it through too. She's around. But notice that she's got Jesus on her hip,
Like a baby.
very like a baby and very realistic. Which leads me into my last talk, which is a week from tomorrow, at 9:30 in the morning and 7 at night, on images of the Virgin Mary. So if you've liked this so far, I didn't get through everything, but I realized 8 o'clock is the cutoff. I'm 5 minutes, Tony. Don't dock my pay. A week from Monday, so a week from this tomorrow, at 9:30 in the morning and at 7 at night here. It's here, right, Richard? We're going to be doing images of Mary. Then the following week, we're going to be doing church architecture, probably up to the Gothic period.
I'm really interested to see.
Any questions on anything for me? Thank you, all of you. I think you are incredible students and lifelong learners, and so I hope you gleaned something from this. And thank you, Father, for your good input. And thank you all very much for coming. And you have handouts with all of the images. So if you have any questions, and if you want to talk to me after this, I can talk. Or if you want to email me any questions, I'm happy to answer your emails.
Thank you very much, Linda. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very
And
much.
all of you who won the Intelligentsia Awards, I congratulate you.
Thank you very much, Linda. As a small token of our appreciation, we have a desk plate for Linda for her home office with her name and a remembrance on the back that says that she was a presenter at our speaker series. So
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Very good.
Yeah, it was my goal.
Yeah, thank you so much.